Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBEZ Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
Yo, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 143 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted. As we have journeyed through the Bible, started at Genesis, find ourselves here today in the book of Nehemiah, and all year long, we'll continue to make our way through the entire Bible by the end of this year. I am back again, joined by my wife, Victoria, who is with me this week as we continue in this kind of two-book, used to be one-book story between Ezra and Nehemiah. Completed the book of Ezra yesterday, and now pick up here in Nehemiah chapter 1. And so just as we get into this, we have 5 chapters to kind of discuss today. As I alluded to, Nehemiah and Esther historically, up until about 600 years ago, was considered one book.
Ezra and Nehemiah.
What did I say? Esther?
Nehemiah and Esther.
I'm sorry. Ezra and Nehemiah. Esther's coming later. Ezra and Nehemiah used to be one book. Thanks for that clarification. And kind of tells one story in a sense of the return of the Israelites back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple and then to rebuild the wall. Ezra focused a little bit more on the temple. Nehemiah is focusing a little bit more on the wall. But again, these books together kind of work together in that regard. So just as we get into chapter 1, we start with these are the words of Nehemiah, and it's in the 20th year of or the 20th year, he said, was in this fortress city of Susa. And essentially the king that's ruling at this time is Artaxerxes, right? And so it's very interesting because I think it's worth kind of going back to Ezra and recounting a little bit of that timeline of kind of how this all plays out. Because Ezra has this very interesting conversation or I would say footnote that happens in chapter 4 where Ezra refers to all of these different kings of Persia. First they have opposition to rebuilding the temple. It kind of starts during the reign of King Darius, who came after King Cyrus. Cyrus is who gives the decree. So we get introduced to Cyrus first. He issues the decree to rebuild the temple. There's King Darius comes, and then there's kind of opposition. Then starting in verse 6 of chapter 4 in Ezra, we hear about, Ahasuerus, or who can sometimes be known as Xerxes. We hear about Artaxerxes, right? And all of this is kind of referred to in this opposition. And so, I think when we get to Nehemiah here and hear about Artaxerxes, it's like, okay, wait a minute. Is this the same guy? It's a different guy. Like, who is this that shows up here in the beginning of Nehemiah? And I think it's important to pay attention and know that, like, as the author puts these books together, not all of it is kind of chronological. Right? Is in order. And so the footnote that happens kind of in chapter 4 between verses 6 and 22 is kind of a summary of opposition that Israel faced all together. And so it kind of travels forward in time really quickly and then comes back in time as it picks up at the end of 24. So we are talking about the same Artaxerxes that's mentioned in chapter 4. We've just now kind of moved to his actual timeline versus what was referred to in Ezra chapter 4. But now that we have that context, what really just jumped out to you here in chapter 1 and chapter 2 as Nehemiah kind of gets this word about what's going on in Jerusalem, and then kind of goes before the king. What jumped out to you in this beginning part of Nehemiah?
Yeah, this verse 1 is what jumped out for me because it says the words of Nehemiah, right? And as you mentioned, Ezra and Nehemiah is all one book written by an author, but you can tell that like it's not one. I don't know, it's like not one person like writing like the whole book in terms of like their own words. Like this author is like piecing together like memoirs, right?
Yep.
It's like a piece of a memoir from Ezra that Ezra wrote for himself, a piece from a memoir from Nehemiah, and then like also some historical documents that they found and kind of like just like kind of put it together. So I think it's really interesting that in verse 1, like this author is kind of like, and these are the words of Nehemiah, right? And like going to transitioning Nehemiah's story, which like you said is kind of jumped back into time a little bit in regards to like where we ended up in Ezra and stuff. So yeah, so I like that. And what jumped out also is this city of Susa jumped out to me because it was mentioned in Ezra here and there, but then it really is mentioned when we eventually get to the book of Esther next week, is like the city of Susa was a big deal. So just to even see that like this is Esther, nobody really knows who wrote it, right? So completely different author, possibly like who was writing, and there's the same city that kind of like jumps out and is like really important. I love, you know, I've said this 1,000 times probably on this podcast. Like I just love how the different books of the Bible, although they're different authors and stuff and different timelines and different like how they still link together. So like this city is still important, which is kind of like, yeah, this is the book. The Bible's a history book at the end of the day. So
yeah, good. Yeah, I actually have always loved chapter 1, mostly just because of like Nehemiah's response, and like it's a passage I refer to often when it's just kind of like you know, how do we pray and what should we pray about and what should we pray for? Because like what I appreciate is that you know, Hananiah's friend comes and kind of tells him what's going on back in Jerusalem, and verse 4, he's just like, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of the heavens. And then I said, and he kind of goes into his prayer. But like, I just love this idea that like, when he heard what was happening in Jerusalem, like he fasted and he prayed and he paused. And like, you know, we kind of had this conversation earlier this week that like, I feel like there's sometimes a temptation, particularly like in the church, right? To like, we hear what's going on elsewhere and like not even where we are. And that like, you know, we just kind of either condemn or we talk about them or we gossip and you be like, man, you hear what's happening in such and such church. And like, you know, it's a shame that this pastor done failed this way, or this deacon done that, or this minister or worship person has done, like, you know, instead of like hearing what's happening in the church, right, in our body, in our community, in our family, in our people, and saying like, man, I need to pray, right, I need to fast, like I need to mourn and weep, right? And like I know again, I just feel so challenged by just the grief he felt when he heard what was happening, because at this point, man, he's living the king. He's a cupbearer to the king.
He's in the palace. He's deep in the palace.
Like, yes,
living
a cupbearer to the king.
Come
you know
on,
what I'm saying? Like,
drinking the finest wine. I get the first sip. I mean, it might be deadly. However, I get the first sip of the fine wine.
Right. Yeah. And so like, it's just, he's living this life, and he could have just been like, well, we good over here.
Yeah.
You know, but he really grieved for it. And we'll see that kind of throughout his book. But like, Nehemiah definitely had a tendency, like what I see from this in him already, is he had a tendency to like see a problem and want to fix a problem.
Absolutely. He's Mr. Fix It.
Yeah, like he wants to fix it. He wants to be a part of the solution, right? Like he wants to make it right. And so I don't know. I just love that first he goes to God in prayer, though. and just kind of asks him for direction, right? And for favor, ultimately, because he knows he has to go before the king and get permission for what it is that he feels his heart's to do. And so he's praying for favor on that. But yeah, I don't know. I just love that. I just love his heart. And I think it's something that I feel really challenged and encouraged to reflect in my own way. But yeah, anything else jump out to you here in chapter 1?
Yeah, I think, like you said, this heart posture of his, because I'm even just thinking of like childhood towns and stuff, like, would I be moved and grieved, right, to that point? But yeah, I love that, like, he laid it out before the Lord. Like, I'm praying, Lord, like, I really am. And I don't know that, like, often my first response, like you said, is to pray, even if it's a situation for my own family, right? Like, I might grieve, I might sit down and weep and cry, but, you know, and sometimes I might say, help me, Lord, right? But I feel like these prayers I've been seeing here and there, they've been like paragraphs long, like, they're pretty extensive. And so, but can I jump into chapter 2?
Yeah.
So, like, chapter 2, though, I love where, you know, it wasn't even just like, oh, I'm just sad and okay, let me get it together. Like, the fact that he even showed up sad in the presence of the king, and that's never, like, you know, it moved him if he had to, like, if he couldn't cover it up, right? Like, he couldn't really, like, keep it together and keep face. But I love his boldness too. Like, I love his boldness in his request to the Lord, and I love his boldness in his request to the king too, because, like, he had no shame. Like, he laid it out, and it seemed like, even, I don't know if this was like Holy Spirit inspired or what, but, like, it seemed like he had a plan. Like, okay, like, how long? Okay, I'm gonna give you a number. What you need? Okay, yeah, this is what I'm asking for, you know?
Yeah.
And that he had a response, and that there was no shame. Versus, like, Ezra was like, yeah, I felt a little bit ashamed to ask the king for anybody to come take us, you know, to Jerusalem, because we told him that our God is merciful and he's going to be watching over us. He was like, listen, I need armed forces. I need materials. I need money. Like, this is what I need.
Yeah.
And so I love the boldness of the request, both to God and to the king.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good.
I know I just jumped through a lot.
No, that's good. I mean, I think that's that's how the story just kind of moves. And I think, as you said, it's good to just call out that sadness was overwhelming to the point that it's ultimately what moved the king. But I love verse 8 of chapter 2, just his willingness to just give credit to where it's due. Like, it's kind of the last line of it, but he says, the king granted my request, for the gracious hand of God was on me. Right? Like, he just knows that the only reason he was able to do this is because the king was gracious to him. I mean, the God was gracious to him, I should say, right? Like, the reason that king gives him everything he essentially asks for is due to the grace of God. And I just love that like, he could have been like, yeah, well, I have favor because, you know, I'm a cupbearer to the king. Like, that's why he let me do this. I've been serving him my whole life, and I've been a good employee, you know. But he's just like, no, God was gracious to me. He didn't have to, honor that request, and I thought that was really something I appreciate.
You see what happened to the cupbearer for the Pharaoh in Egypt when Joseph was around. He was thrown in jail for something.
Yeah.
They don't always get favor.
True.
But I do love what he said, that, like, he pointed it back to God. And it just even made me think of, like, yeah, probably God positioned him, even as cupbearer, with the boldness of who he is and the integrity of who he is. Like, that God's placed specifically Nehemiah there to be in a position to even ask of the king these things, right? And be granted, and to go back. And as we see, he goes back and he becomes the governor of the region, right? Like,
yeah,
that he has, like, position and authority even when he goes back. And I just feel like I'm glad that he acknowledges it to God, because what we've seen over the chapters and even these books, that sometimes it goes to people's heads, right? That like God puts them in a position, God makes them king, and then it's kind of like, oh, I'm the big shot. And then the Lord has to humble them. But like I love that he has kept that in mind, that like where he is, even though he is technically a slave, right?
Yeah.
That he is placed there by God.
Yeah. It's good. One thing that just sticks out to me as we kind of move through chapter 2 is there's this kind of quick like Easter egg foreshadow type thing where they just mention Sanballat, Tobiah, and just how they were greatly displeased, and we'll learn a little bit more about them throughout this book. But I love he just kind of drops that in at the end of verse 10. And then he gets to Jerusalem, and again, it was very just interesting. His first thing, like he takes time to really just like survey the land, get an idea of what's happening, watch it. He doesn't even tell anybody what his plans are. He just kind of goes and scouts it out. And I just thought it was very interesting, just the time he took to, even when I come back to how he prayed, like it just seemed that Nehemiah had a way of him of just not kind of being impulsive and just reacting, but taking the time to like prayerfully consider and observe. And I don't know, I just thought it was interesting the way he just inspected everything.
Yeah, I do. I love that he said he went out, was it at night? I don't know, in my mind
verse 12 says I got up at night and took a few men with me.
Just like Ezra, I went back with a mission, right? He was like, okay, where the Levites at? Who are the people I need to get like the spiritual order of the people in line, right? The temple in line. Like it seems like he went out and was like, okay, like you said, he surveyed the wall. Like, what do we need to do? Like, what does this look like? And how do we fix this? Like you said before, like he came up and he showed up to fix things. And he wasn't prideful about it, right? Like it wasn't like he said, like, I didn't even tell anybody what I was doing. I didn't even tell the leaders and officials like exactly what, but then he just continued to point it back to God. Like I told him, the hand of God has been upon me for good. And he just continues to like point back to like God. The God will make us prosper. This is in verse 20. God of heaven will make us prosper, and we as servants will arise and build. But you have no portion, right, and claim. This is when he's talking to, like you said, the nugget that you dropped of these people who are opposing them eventually. But like I love that, like he is about God's mission. Yeah,
and it's because of that he has confidence, right? The people have confidence. They say, let's start building, and even when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, like when they start to mock him, it's because of God that he has the confidence to have success, right? In kind of verse 20. That, and a little shade, like y'all don't get to be a part of this because you're against it. But
they were upset.
Yeah, it was clear he really knew where his kind of help was and who was behind him, and had confidence in God in that. And so chapter 3, it's ultimately they kind of start to get to work, right? So chapter 3 and really all of it kind of deals with the different parts of the wall that they're building, towers and gates and things of that nature. They go through who does it as well, and like what parts that they do. Anything that just jumped out to you in chapter 3 as they just kind of break down these different parts of the wall and the different pieces of people who are participating in building it. Anything jump out to you in chapter 3?
Yeah, the first people who got up, it says in the verse 1, maybe they might not have been like the first, but it says the high priest, right, and his brothers. Like we've talked before about like the different jobs of the priests and like how extensive their job is and endless their job description is. Like at one point they're butchers, at one point they're soldiers. Like now we see them as architects and construction workers, right?
That's hilarious, yeah.
And so like the high priest is like the first ones to like go up, but I think it was really impressive that like he had record of who did what and who was even working next to each other and beside one another. I think that was really cool to see, like, and across from him and beside them were, and that was really interesting to me, because I was like,
crazy
detail. Like across from the tombs of David, I was like, whoa, hold on, we got tombs now. And I never really even thought about where they were, like the bones and stuff were laid and kept, right? And so
yeah, that's really good. And I mean, I think just out of that, because I mean, I said to go through each of these, because again, it's a lot of people we don't know and names we don't know, you know, and even bits and pieces of the wall we probably don't completely understand and know with the gates and stuff. But
right.
I did think there was kind of a cool shout out here in 12 to this guy who's building with his daughters as well, right? And so Shalom, son of Halalesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs, he and his daughters, right? Which we don't really kind of see that throughout this as well. And so again, just a quick little shout out to like,
come on, ladies.
Yeah, they're involved, and I just appreciate it. And it probably points to again how significant or different it was for that to be the case. But I appreciate that it wasn't just overlooked, but it was saw. So anything else in 3, and just kind of as they're building that you thought was particularly significant?
Not really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, 4, we hear from our opposition again.
It's our boys. They're back.
Yeah, and it's very different to me than in Ezra, because Ezra, there was opposition, but it was kind of more like maybe from a people group or something. In Nehemiah, man, it's like these 3 cats that just really have an issue with Nehemiah building this wall. The people, and so they keep coming back. So now we're dealing with Sanballat, and then Tobiah and Geshem. These are the 3 that I keep kind of referring to, mostly Sanballat and Tobiah. But here they are, upset. They heard they were building a wall and it became furious. They mock them. And again, they try to essentially slow them down or stop them, from doing it. And it's interesting to see them just kind of push through that. What do you find interesting here in chapter 4?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, okay, so Samaria, I guess, has an army, right? Which is interesting to me because Israel was taken captive, still captive, right? Like the whole nation, but the remnants of who are left there, some previous Jews in a mixing, that they have created themselves, it seems like a city for sure, and like a little army here, and here, what used to be like, what used to be Israel, right? And Judah and Israel used to be together, so like they're like brother cousins, right? Brothers. It's interesting. I was like, is this like the first rivalries right now that like is why Samaria and Israel like really didn't like each other? Like I know that they had feuds, of course, even between different kings, right? Like even way back then, but like even just Samaria in itself having this like, I don't know, like I said, my version in verse 1 says that he was angry, like and enraged. Like there is this real like opposition and anger and malice towards the Jews who have come back. And I think it was just interesting to me that, like you said, he's making these comments. Like, I'm like, are we kids on the playground? Like, what are we doing? Like, talking about each other. But like you said, I do respect and I do love that they built the wall, and they said they was up to like half of its height. And I was like, oh, like they're doing the best they can and they're putting in all this work, but yet like it's still half of what it was before. But they were closing the gaps. It even says that they heard that the gaps were being closed, and all of that, and so they continued to plot, but they continued to pray to God. The Jews continued to pray to God that he would guard and protect them, and God did.
I do appreciate just the perseverance, man. Like it again, some of these stories are really kind of like pictures in my mind, again, just our lives, right, and spiritual warfare and some of the opposition that we'll face. And you got this enemy that's his whole goal is to deceive and to discourage and to lie, right? And just like even their opposition wasn't like they came and struck them down with swords, right?
Right.
What did they attack them with? They came and started mocking them.
Taunting.
What are these pathetic Jews doing? Can they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they ever finish it? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's those kind of questions. And I'm like, man, that's the same questions we ask ourselves, or the enemy asks us, that gets us in a place of discouragement, to not want to press forward and persevere. And so I just love that beautiful picture of how they just pressed and they pushed forward and they kept trying and they did their best. And then to take it next level, man, they put on the full armor. Like,
they strapped up.
They were sitting here, like, I love this verse 18. Each of the builders had his sword strapped around his waist while he was building, and the trumpeter was beside me, right? Verse 17 tells you, backing up a little bit, that the laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other.
Yep.
Like, they were for real.
That's my verses. Those are my verses right there.
They were working. They were armored up, ready to go, because it was like, look, I am ready for whatever attack you bring my way. I'm gonna still do the work. Yeah. I'm gonna be ready to defend myself. Like, I'm not allowed to take it. And like I said, again, it's just this beautiful picture of what warfare looks like in our life, and how we have to be both doing the work and on guard, kind of at the same time. So yeah, I love their perseverance and their willingness to push through that. So those are your verses, though. What you want to add to that?
I say you took my stuff. I'm just kidding, though. But continuing on, though, just at verse 23, like the fact that he says, neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. And like he said, now, to me at first I was like, that's nasty. But to the point of what he's trying to say is, like, we stayed ready, and we didn't even like let an opportunity to like slip by us for us not to be ready. It's something that, like you said, even to the spiritual warfare part, like, don't let your guard down. Like, even here, we're not letting our guard down. We are like strapping on the full armor of God. And I know for us, it's more of like how we guard our minds and how we trust in the Lord, and how we seek the Lord for peace, and like these different things that we're doing, and not physically putting a sword. You can't walk around with swords in America. You just can't
go around with guns.
Listen,
we in the South, man.
That's not what we're talking about. We wrestle not against flesh and blood.
South Carolina's an open carry state now.
It sure is. Help us. But yeah, because I'm not. I can't do that. I just. What I look like, baby bottle. Like Glock 9. But anyways, but yeah, like it's more like you said, being on guard, right? And doing these, like having your shield of faith and these, shoes of peace and stuff, these belts of truth, and how we act and how we trust. That like keeps the enemy at bay, but like never think that it's a moment. And I'm bad at this, because there are days where like I do not intentionally think about like, okay, Lord, help me to find your truth in everything that I hear, and help me to like let me speak truth, right? Like and live that. Like, I don't even go through all the pieces of the armor each day. So I just know I'm leaving myself vulnerable for the attack, right? And then I wonder why I'm having like terrible days sometimes, and just letting, like you said, the enemy gets to my mind first.
Yeah.
But because that's what they did. They came taunting first, right?
Yep.
Before they even showed up with anything, like they came to taunt them first. And so for me, I'm just like, oh, this was so good. So good for me.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter who you were. Because these are servants. We got priests. We got like just regular Joe Schmo. Like all of them were working and all of them were strapped. Yeah. These weren't like saying just the army. There was no army.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting to me is, though, what's missing? An attack.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean that, like, one, that's the whole point. Like, they were ready for it. They weren't trying to go attack anybody. They were just prepared to defend themselves. But what's missing from this passage right here is an actual attack, which is like, it's all these empty threats, man. Like, first it was, again, like you said, the taunting, but even in verses like 11 and 12, it's just like, yeah, when the Jews, or verse 11, that, and our enemies said, and they won't realize it until we're among them, it can kill them and stop the work.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're making these threats to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't know, to this point, they haven't actually done anything. And I feel like that's just, to me, it's just like the enemy, right? To, like, have us fearful and then make threats and have us scared. But,
yeah. Yeah. And, which, moving into chapter 5, it seemed like some of their greatest, like, burden was amongst their own people. Like, not only was, like, these people not physically attacking you, like you said, there was no physical attack. I stayed ready, and I was on guard. But then here we got in chapter 5, like, us mistreating each other by, like, taxing each other or enslaving each other, and, you know, being hard on each other and harsh. And I'm just like, geez, that's us sometimes, right? Like, that the biggest threats and the biggest things that are happening is, like, within our own family body, like our own Christ body, right? Like,
that's real. But again, it goes back to, this is one of those examples that I was referring to about Nehemiah seeing a problem and wanting to fix it, like him being willing to step up and make a change, right? Because he sees this and he's upset. He's like, this is unacceptable, right? And so he steps in, like, it's real, like, civil rights, social injustice, like, approach to, hey, that's not the way it should be. Let's create a change, and I'm gonna do something about it. I mean, verse 6 tells me he became extremely angry. Right, like when he heard these outcries and these complaints. I love it, says, and after seriously considering the matter, that's what mine reads. It's just like, it's such a funny phrasing, but. Yeah, man, I just love that he steps in. He's just like, no, y'all gotta get his money back, give everything back to people you took it from, right? And then some, like, here's your reparations, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're giving it back to you, and take it, because ultimately, what you did was wrong, man. You should have never done that. And I love how he actually, what I appreciate most about it is, it's not even like this is right or wrong in a sense of, like, a social issue. I feel like what he says in verse 9 is that, like, what you are doing isn't right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God and not invite the reproach of our foreign enemies? Like, to me, it's like, what you're doing is not of God. Yeah. Right? And we know, if we go back to the Levitical laws and the laws of Exodus, God was very clear about how the Israelites were supposed to treat one another. Yes. Especially when it came to things like slavery. Yeah. And sell it, right? You had the year of Jubilee that was supposed to free people. You had, like, hey, don't enslave foreigners, things of that nature, because you guys were once slaves, right? Consider that and remember it. Treat people the right way. You know, don't ever overtax or ask, take more than what's desired, right? There were so many things that were lost that he was just like, this is a God issue. It's not, I don't care what Babylon's doing, Persia was doing, like, it's not a social issue, it's a God issue. Yeah. And I love that he points them back to that, in my opinion.
And you know that they knew this, because before Nehemiah even gets on the scene, Ezra was there teaching the people. Like, he was teaching them the book of the law. Like, that was his thing. And then they were all, like, committing to, yes, we will follow, yes, we will do, And so it's not like they have been enslaved in Babylon, they've forgotten all these things, because I'm sure that they're being reminded of these laws. Yeah. And that you should know them. Yeah.
And then I think the last thing that just jumped out to me on that is that he leads by example, right? Into chapter 5, he kind of just says, he just kind of says, like, the whole time I'm governor, I don't even take the portion that's allotted to me. Yep. I want to make sure they had already been burdened enough. They had enough. I want to make sure people didn't feel like they had to bring, that portion to me. I wanted to make sure that they had what they need. And, you know, I got all these people at my table. I'm making sure they all taken care of, right? And that type of thing. And then verse 19, just remember me favorably, my God, for all that I've done for this people. Like, it's still about God, man. It's still about God. I just want you to remember me favorably. I don't even want the people to remember me favorably. Like, it's not even about I want to be famous and I want to be known. It's like, God, would you remember me favorably for all that I've done for this people? So, yeah, I love that he leads by example.
He does. And I kind of took that last line a little different. And to me, it kind of was given like, I'm trying, Lord. Like, you see me trying. I don't know what these people doing. They acting up. I'm trying. Can you at least see that I'm trying and doing my part? Remember me favorably, because I'm doing the best I can.
That's funny.
You know, but that's
You
just
would.
that's just how I interpret
You
things.
would.
That is
your worldview.
It's my worldview. I know. As I read the Bible, it's just like they wilding, they doing all the extras, and I continue trying to do my part. I'm not bargaining to people. They burning each other. I done told them not to.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. Remember me, Lord.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it for me.
Okay. Well, that gets us through the first 5 chapters of Nehemiah. We have 2 more days to finish, so we'll continue to read what Nehemiah is facing and up against. He continues to want to establish the walls in Jerusalem. But appreciate you guys joining us. Again, hopefully this is helpful as you read along and help you with your reading. Keep up with your reading. That's priority. We always kind of say that. This is really meant to supplement and be additional. But yeah, look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we pick up in chapter 6. And until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.